Good morning. To build a truly diverse and inclusive nonprofit sector that reflects the realities of addressing equity and breaking down systems of oppression, we need to start at the top with a critical group of stakeholders, boards of directors. They are ultimately held accountable for organizational resiliency and success, from managing finances to fundraising to ensuring that the organizations they serve are accomplishing their mission in the most impactful way possible. Hi, I'm Brenda Asari, President and CEO of the Alfred Group.
I'm Amy Hines, Senior Vice President of the Alfred Group. Welcome.
Today, the Alfred Group will share the firm's experience from the last 41 years of working with over 3,000 boards. This morning, Amy and I are looking forward to sharing the Alfred Group's experience from the past 41 years of working with over 3,000 nonprofit boards. This morning, we are looking forward to equipping you with information, knowledge that you will need to create a pathway forward that is intentional, strategic, and engages all of your board members at the highest level in creating an equity-forward board culture. Boards are no more diverse than they were 40 years ago, since BoardSource started tracking diversity data through their biannual study. Certainly over the past 6 months, boards are well aware of the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They want to become more diverse, but lack knowledge, skills, resources, and genuine commitment to the change required to turn that awareness and desire into sustainable action. Language matters when it comes to conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. You can liken it to diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, equity is ensuring that everyone has appropriate transport to the party, regardless of the starting point. And lastly, access is being able to enter the party without a special pass.
So, what does equity forward board culture actually mean? Well, it's about real possibility for transformation. In fact, the boards that we work with are looking for strategies to really create deliberate corrective action by their organization to foster that culture of equity, and based on increasing diversity and identifying ways to have a culture of inclusion as well. This is an opportunity for nonprofits not just to reinvent, but actually to reimagine who they are. And there's a real opportunity to redesign services, to remain responsive, nimble, effective, and all the while embracing new constituents, including board leaders, staff, donors, community, and the people they serve, most importantly. What is the case for diversity, equity, and inclusion? We know from research that, in fact, the value of diversity to an organization or a team is multifaceted. Diversity actually enhances creativity. And we're talking, the research has been done on diverse personality, diverse backgrounds, diverse lived experiences, diverse ways of acting in a group. We know from this research that diversity encourages the search for novel information and perspectives. It leads to real innovation, better decision-making and problem solving. And diversity can improve the bottom line of companies, we know, and lead to discoveries and breakthroughs. Even simply being exposed to diversity can change the way you think. Except, as Brenda mentioned, there are some deficits in the nonprofit sector in particular right now. 74% of boards and executive committees do not have a written statement on diversity and inclusion of board membership. only 34% of boards and executive committees tie diversity and inclusion goals to the strategic plan of the organization. 22, when asked about this, say it's not even applicable to their organization, and 14 responded that they're not sure. So we, as Brenda mentioned, work with a lot of nonprofit organizations, and we have quite a bit of experience talking with the ones who want to improve their culture of equity. But when it gets down to the hard work of building the diversity of a board, we hear a lot of these kinds of comments. Well, we can't find anyone qualified for our board, or we don't know anyone. And the worst is we want people to fit in. And we're a fundraising board, and we don't know people of color who can give. Or we need them to serve on a committee first, so kind of deferring and delaying the process. Then maybe we'll bring them onto the board. And I wanted to share with you that in my own personal volunteer work on a local library board, I just recently heard the third excuse on this list when I was pushing the nominating committee to really work on bringing in a cadre of people of color to an all-white board. And the first response that I heard was, well, we need to know the person. We need to be able to ensure that they're going to fit in with us. So we all have a lot of work to do. That just showed me the challenge is up front and center in my own life, not just with my clients. So what do equity-centered boards do differently? Well, for starters, they create a culture of equity by asking the hard questions on the board, within the board. They elevate equity-forward values and advance community-informed engagement around diversity and inclusion. Intentional board practices such as self-evaluation are really important, and surveying board members gives board members an opportunity every year to provide feedback on how we're doing on the feeling of inclusion and the sense that the culture of equity is deepening and growing. Conducting meetings that matter is an important goal. Because meetings that matter really engage everyone at the board meeting. So there's skill building to facilitate in terms of running board meetings so that people really do feel all people feel included. And boards need, equity-centered boards and forward boards need to be working all the time on how to engage better in meetings and with group dynamics so people feel welcomed and included. And ultimately, organizations have to hold themselves accountable for achieving those goals that they set for themselves and measure the progress and give people opportunities to let them know how they're doing.
You know, when we think about assessing your board culture, I'd like for us to pause for 1 minute as we go to the next slide. I would like for all of you to just think about the journey. So as we go to the next slide, so where is your organization? If we were here live with you, this would be a poll question. So when you think about the DEI journey, you can go anywhere from being asleep, where your organization or your board really don't see the value of looking inwardly or investing time or resources to making diversity, equity, and inclusion a priority. And then you go to the next stage of being awake, which means you have some sense of it. So this might be, as you think about the board, it may just be from representation. You have a diverse board. Oftentimes we hear, let's just get one person of color, and we've checked that box. So we hear that a lot. So boards may think that they're on this path when they either hire diverse staff or they recruit a board member from a different background and checking that box. So it's really just representation. When we look at being a woke organization, that's really where you're looking at going beyond representation, but really thinking about the culture of your organization and truly being inclusive, where you have equipped your staff in the organization to really look at how are we interacting within the organization and externally, and creating what we call a safe place for these kinds of challenging conversations. But again, your comfort grow the more you exercise that muscle. And so many times people are afraid of saying the wrong thing. And you only learn to say the most appropriate things through practice and having really engaging, robust conversations. And that's where you get to the work of really applying this racial equity lens to all aspects of the organization, where you're actually evaluating your programs. You're creating a culture where equity forward culture rules and is a part of the values of the organization. So where are you on your organization's journey? And where would you say your board is on this journey? Are they asleep? Are they at work? So as we look at the next slide, the 5 key questions that boards should really be asking themselves if they're going to be leaning in and really solidifying themselves as an equity board. The first question that they should be asking themselves would be, are we ever at risk of making decisions without fully understanding how these decisions may affect those we serve? So again, outward looking and trying to really understand and engage the voices from the community that you're serving. Second question, how well are we cultivating a deeper understanding of the community or communities that we serve and bringing their perspectives, their voices, and feedback into our strategic boardroom discussions? If we were to make a deeper commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity, what would that mean for our mission, for our work, and the people we serve? How would we operate differently if we really had a deeper commitment? If someone were to make assumptions about your organization's values based on your board composition, what are they likely to think? And then lastly, how is your organization's reputation being negatively or positively impacted by your board's current composition vis-a-vis diversity? And again, it's not just around diversity, but it's also being inclusive in how you engage all voices around that board table or around the Zoom room. Next slide. This is just a really simple checklist, and this is just 5 items on a checklist. It's a much more extensive checklist, and one of the tools that we will make available to you through our board toolkit. We have an equity forward board toolkit that we will make available to you at no cost, but really it's the Alfred Group's contribution to the sector to advance equity forward boards and to equip boards to operate at a higher level. So again, the thing that we love about this board assessment, simple checklist, you read through the indicator and be honest about where are you? Have you not started yet to being well on your way to being exemplary and perhaps being a model for other boards? And let's talk more about, so how do we go about building a more diverse and inclusive board?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Starting with the recruitment of people who bring diversity of lived experiences to your organization, we recommend that you start by evaluating your current board composition. And you go from there to creating a fully articulate strategy, which we'll talk about in a minute, but one that is targeted towards not just building a diverse board in terms of people of color, but also bringing the diversity of skill sets that you want to have on your board to fill out your board committees, to ensure that you have classes rotating through who will serve for extensive periods of time. So that will become your full recruiting strategy. Try new strategies. I mean, obviously doing the same thing over and over again results in the same results. So you're not going to get very far if you don't try something new. Definitely avoid tokenism. Try to avoid bringing on one person of color at a time. It makes a whole lot of sense to look at where you have a pool of positions on your board available to try and bring, more than one person at a time who brings the diversity of race to your board so that somebody doesn't feel like a token. Make sure there are leadership opportunities on your board. If your board is stagnant and officers never rotate, there's no opportunity for people to really take on something meaningful with their volunteer time. That will prove to be a deterrent to attracting quality people for your board. Encourage current board members to network with advisory or affinity groups that are not represented on the board, and use the recruitment matrix to revise the board member nominating process to ensure a diverse pool. And I will show you that here. This is one we worked on with a current client, actually, and we're in that preliminary stage of assessment. This is a sort of condensed version of what they're doing. But what we like about this particular matrix is that over on the left, maybe my pointer will work. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So over on the left, you see you'd insert each person's name who's on the board, and you'd add the total of the board members, and you'd compare that to the number of board positions that are in your bylaws. And then you would see you have a balance needed of the difference. Well, you take that principle of goal setting for a number of the criteria that you see across the top of this grid. So in this organization's situation, they have campuses in 3 different regions. So they need to think about building a board with people from those regions who can bring insights and perspective and knowledge of those areas. So here they have assigned for person A that they're from the Southeast, and the other major area, which is labeled H. And there's no representation from their third region, which is the area down here in the actual, which is 0% of their board. So on the assumption that they would like to, but it might not be perfectly equal, have equal representation from these regions, they should have, with 3 regions, a portion that's relatively equal to their, actually they have 4 regions. So there's 25% that they would establish as a goal. They have a lot of work to do, but it's an opportunity, because you can go to somebody and say, we really want you, because you also, along with everything else you bring to us, you bring that you live in this area, and we would like to bring more people onto the board from here. Race is a clear indication on this board, and this is why they're talking with us to get some help, where they have nobody of color on their board. So if they're going to establish some goals in a board retreat of, well, how many people will they bring on this coming year? What is their goal? So then the balance they need is all 3 of those people. That's a priority. A typical board grid also includes what expertise or community connections each individual has. And then over here on the right, this we have found really helpful in the area of building a diverse board, identifying which of your board members serve on which committees. These are your committees. And then indicating, well, the actual total down here, and what is the number of people you would like to have as a target for each of those committees? And then the bottom line here indicates the number of people you really want to recruit for those committees, because you need people with finance background or marketing and outreach or buildings and facilities or medicine in this case, or policy. So this becomes an important tool in your toolbox for coming up with a plan for recruitment.
Amy, if you can just go back, what I really like about this matrix is that you have a really clear snapshot of the composition of your board and where you have gaps. And it shows you, when we look at this, there are 2 areas of opportunities for this particular board. Certainly geographic region, because you can see they're heavily weighted in the H region. And then certainly age. They could use some help with age as well, but for sure, on the ethnic and the racial profile piece of it, they could really use some help. But I love this because what it shows at the bottom, when you look at the balance needed, it can also show them where to place their priority focus. Because we realize that it doesn't happen overnight. We talked about not bringing on leaders of color, single person, but bringing in a couple of people at the same time. But I love this grid because it really gives a great snapshot of priorities, and then where you can really place more attention over a longer period of time in terms of intentional board recruitment. But this is a wonderful tool that I know many of our clients have used and have found it very, very helpful in diversifying their board and being very strategic around how they approach this really important aspect of building their boards.
And who does that responsibility usually fall to? It's the governance committee. And the governance committee then takes on or nominating committee, but takes on the challenge of taking their plan for prioritizing who and where they want to bring people onto the board, but asking. And it's not just who you ask. Very importantly, in our experience, it's how you ask. And we've alluded to that in talking about the grid. I don't think many people appreciate being approached to join a board because you're rich. So would you please join our board? We need rich people. And the same is true with somebody of color. Well, you're Black, and we really would like a Black person on our board. Wouldn't you love to come be a token on our board? No. Nobody wants to be asked like that. So it's important to have your plan for what your board needs in a more holistic way so that you can say, our board is looking for people with your financial skills. And we're also seeking to increase our diversity and would love to have your lived experience as an African American on our board and serve on our finance committee. Would you be willing to consider that? So I think it's really important to be clear about how you're asking someone to join your board and be very affirmative.
And also answering the question of why you want that person on the board. And Amy, I get invitations all the time to be on boards. And there are two reasons. Typically, number one, I can replace their fundraising committee or the fundraising staff person because I know everything about fundraising, of course. And then secondly, I'm a woman of color. And so when I get those types of invitations, I say no because they haven't really taken the time to get to know what's important to me. So in this portion of our time together, I just wanted to share some feedback, from Vital Voices, lessons that we've learned from board members of color. So as we go to the next slide, we find that, like any other board member, when you approach a leader of color to serve on your board, the very first thing that's going to be most important to them is a passion for the mission of the organization. So that's why it's really important to do your homework. I was talking to a really good friend of mine who is a well-known philanthropist in our marketplace. And I was asking her, I'm like, what motivates you to be on boards and what motivates you to give? And she has a child who is special needs. And she's like, Brenda, I've never been asked to serve on an organization's board who specifically addresses the needs of children, with the kinds of needs that my daughter has. And she said, I would love it if someone actually did some homework. If they actually read the press about me and my family, they would have my heart. They would have my time. They would have my talent. They would have my treasure. So it's really important to do your homework to determine the passion for the mission of the organization. And for donors of color, the opportunity to give back to the community, that also rates very, very high. Much as we grow up with this saying, to whom much has been given, much is expected. So this obligation is a part of our DNA. And I'm speaking as a person of color who serve on boards. something that's very, very important is this opportunity to give back to the community. And so again, you see the other factors that influence board service, the prestige of the organization that's somewhat or, not at all important. But again, keeping in mind the opportunity for professional growth is also a key factor for your outreach efforts to leaders of color. When we go to the next slide, factors that shape the board experience. The number one thing, as in any organization, what is the board culture? What is that board doing to be inclusive? How is it inviting me to be a part of a board where they treasure diversity of opinions, recognize that diversity of thought adds richness to the decision-making process? So culture trumps everything in terms of a positive board experience. Now, when we look at what are the factors that negatively shape the board experience, we find on the next slide that being ignored or being the lone minority voice that is constantly outvoted and not taken seriously is one of the key things that negatively shape the board experience for leaders of color. And again, this still goes back to culture. Culture trumps everything. So as we think about what are the most important actions for a board to create or to put in place in creating a stronger board culture, and Amy's already touched on this before. Number one, an active, targeted recruitment of diverse board members is essential. And not only, going out into the marketplace, but also having in place structures, proactive policies and practices where your board has a diversity statement and goals that they have set as a part of their own ethos and the DNA of your board. A strategic board recruitment process, as Amy has already highlighted, that identifies gaps and will enable you to cultivate relationships. Remember, there are different ways to engage leaders of color. Sometimes you may bring people on to serve on a subcommittee or an ad hoc committee because it's a time certain project that you're working on and they're bringing the kind of expertise. Oftentimes, this might be a great opportunity for you to assess how well they can make a contribution to your organization through their time and talent. Oftentimes, we bring people right onto the board. So again, we have a whole onboarding process that needs to be in place and be intentional and not just sending an email, look at all of these documents and come to the first meeting. So there's a whole onboarding process as well. And then lastly, really creating the safe space for conversations to take place relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion, where all voices are encouraged, heard, and valued. I'm currently on the board where I serve as the chair of our DEI committee. And we have 18 people on the board. And of the 18, we have 3 individuals who are diverse. So I'm an African-American woman. We have a Latinx woman on the board. And we have another woman who comes from a background she's from Puerto Rico. And trying to have this conversation with my board has been very challenging because many of my non-white colleagues don't feel safe about having the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they think, we're doing fine. Why do we need to even talk about this? We're fine. We're here. We support the organization. We're engaging with the community. But it's more than that. It's what is the culture of the organization and what are we going to do to continue to build that culture and work toward a place where everyone feels safe to ask questions and to explore and really have some hard conversations about the work that we're doing together as a board.
So,
Amy, how do we get there?
So the pathway forward, we always like to talk about the pathway forward after we've identified the challenges. And really, we've touched on all of them. And we would like to wrap up our presentation and discussion with you by sharing this visual of the steps that you can take. So starting over at the top left, we recommend the board self-assessment and survey. So these are ways that people on the board who are giving of their time and serving your organization and mission can provide feedback, and it should be done regularly. It can be done by yourself. It can also be done with the help of a firm like ours or a firm like BoardSource who can help ensure anonymity of answers, but it's a really helpful tool. Then to hold board retreats or discussions specifically to understand what the results of that assessment mean for your organization, and to potentially have those conversations Brenda was talking about, where people share what those opportunities may be to improve the culture of your board, and ultimately to set some goals. So moving over to the setting goals, clarifying the vision for the organization, getting everyone on the same page by sharing those the information, the evidence of how people are experiencing service on the board, setting those goals, and creating a group on your board, we have found, is a very helpful tool that is like a subcommittee, it's a task force. They are taking ownership and embracing the challenges of becoming a more equity forward board. And so they create the post-retreat impact goals that they would like to see for the organization. Going along, they may, for example, and often do, want to bring in some outside resources to facilitate those difficult conversations at the board level, or really training and education conversations to help the board agree on a pathway forward together. Developing the action plan, tracking the progress with that plan, constantly evaluating outcomes, refining strategies. We believe this process is an ongoing one, and it ultimately become a cycle that you want to repeat and planned in your strategic planning process, perhaps, to conduct on a really intentional basis over a period of years and see how far you can get. And our final words to you are very simple. Keep going and represent for your organization a real power to move forward with intention and optimism for being able to improve your culture of equity and inclusion. We have really enjoyed being part of this conference, and thank you for inviting us. We are delighted to share with you what we're learning. And in fact, Brenda mentioned that you can go to our website and download for free our board toolkit, our equity toolkit for the whole organization. It's not just for the board, or it is for the board. It's a board toolkit. Start over. Brenda and I thank you for the opportunity to present to you at this conference. We're very pleased to be here and to share some of the things we've been learning as we've been taking on this important challenge and opportunity to become a more just culture externally, but also within organizations where we serve. Brenda's mentioned to you that we have a board toolkit that's free and available to you to download online that has some checklists that are very helpful and a pathway that forward for your board to travel. We also I would like to share with you, are rolling out our own Culture of Equity self-assessment tool. It will enable you to find a place to start in a holistic way, not just on your board, but including on your board, on your journey towards a more equitable culture overall. And we hope you will keep an eye out for that on our website, and we will be letting you know if you're on our email list when that becomes available. Thank you.
Thank you.